and welcome back to my channel. In this video I'm going to be introducing my Pan That Palette series. So Pan That Palette was introduced by Amber F here on YouTube. I'll link her channel down below, and this is the palette that I have decided to be my Pan That palette for 2021. I'm starting it early at the end of November because I think it will be great to get a month's head start on it, and I'm new to this, so I thought why not start now. In addition to this, I'm going to also randomly generate one eyeshadow palette each month, and it will be my secondary focus palette. I'm also going to be doing a Pan Those Eyeshadows, which was started by Alexi here on YouTube. I will link her down below, but I'm going to do that in a separate video. So I will be doing a Pan That palette with this palette, and every month I'm going to randomly generate another palette, and the aim for the other palette will be to use each shade once. So first I'm going to talk about my Pan That palette and why I picked it, etc., and then I will talk more about my monthly palette. But it was only appropriate to start with one of my oldest eyeshadow palettes. If you've seen my eyeshadow collection video, then you'll know that these two are jointly my oldest palettes, but as I own 4 naked palettes, I thought that it would be more appropriate. I wouldn't want to get rid of any out of my collection, so I thought if I used up these I could either take out the other shadows and use them as singles, say if I only had a couple left. And also I find that this palette I could have these 6 shades taken out, and for me this 9 would be a perfect palette. It wouldn't be any different. I don't use mattes to set my eye base, so I use the MAC paint pot in Soft Oakley, and as you can see I actually have pan in this, and it's weird because it's glass pan so you can see through it, but yeah, so this is what I use as my eyeshadow base. So I don't set it, that's just what I do, and for me, like, having 3 slightly different inner corner highlights is just not worth it to me. So for me, like, I know that these two are very different obviously, but this one in the middle, I really don't see the point in it, and I really don't use matte shades, so for me this side could be completely taken off. I'm quite happy just to use my highlighter as an inner corner if I can't, if a palette doesn't have one. I've got the Natasha Denona Bronze palette and the Jackie Aina palette that both I have to do that for, and so I am more than happy just to use this as an inner corner highlight because then it matches my face highlight and I think that looks coherent. So shades that I definitely think I'll be able to hit pan on are, well, I'm not sure I'll be able to hit pan on any shades because I know that MAC are quite tightly pressed. They're hard shadows, so I know that it's going to be hard. But shadows I think that I definitely can hit pan on is Amber Lights, because it's got the biggest dip in it, because back when I used to use this palette, that was what I did. I basically used these 3 shadows and that one was the one that went all over. Saddle is another, this transition brown is another shade that I think that I could use up because it's a transition shade, it's going to be easy to use up. I also love this shade called Unwinded. It's a gorgeous green gold and it is unique in my collection and therefore something that I've started to reach for a lot when I use this palette. I also think I can use these 2 shades up. I've tried using this to set my concealer under my face as I have definitely got a yellow undertone, so this works for that for me, so I'm pretty certain I'll be able to use this up. Also, I've tried using this shade as a highlighter and I can use that as a highlighter. I'm sure some of these other light shimmery shades I'll be able to use as a highlighter. Shades that I don't think I'm going to use up is mainly this grey, and it's not really a black, it's not pigmented enough to be a black, but this shade called Dance in the Dark. And I'm also not too sure whether I'll use up these three, as I've got a lot of warm tones in other palettes and I've never really done a look using these, I don't think. I am going to track how much I use each shadow each day, and I am starting this, so I'm filming this on the 20th of November and I'm going to start it on the 21st of November. My first update will be at the end of December, and then I will update every month after that. And I thought, part of me wanted to wait till January to start this, as you know, that's most people run it January to December for the whole year. But I thought there's no harm in getting an extra month. It is a couple days later, and I did actually scrape the top off this shade, Dance in the Dark, and also this shade, and they now swatch a lot better. So I'm going to swatch out all of the shades so you can see how well they all swatch. So as you can see, I definitely tend to lean more this end of the colour spectrum compared to this end of the shades, because I do prefer this part of the palette compared to this half. So each month I'm going to pick a palette randomly to be my palette for the month, to go alongside my Pan That palette. I want to do this because although I'm starting a Pan That palette, I don't want to completely ignore my other eyeshadow palettes, and I think this is a great way to make sure that each palette gets its own turn. So I have 12 eyeshadow palettes, which works out perfectly for one each month, but I'm also getting one for Christmas, so that means that with that palette included I will have 13 palettes, and as I'm starting this a month early, that is the perfect amount for each palette to get its own month. So I have a Excel sheet with all of my palettes, and it's got all of my eyeshadows numbered for when I start my pan those eyeshadows. Oh, if you want, just before I pick my palette for the month of December 2020, if you want to see all of my eyeshadow palettes and all of my single eyeshadows, then I will link the video down below where I go through all of that. I'm now going to generate my palette. So, palette 4. I'm glad that it's a lower number because that means it's an older palette. Oh, this is very interesting. So, my first palette is my Morphe 12MB palette. And this is what it looks like. It is very neutral. It is mainly matte, so that I think it's going to be a really easy palette to have as my first accompanying palette. So the rules that I've set myself for this is that each palette that I pick, I have to use every shade at least once. I'm going to track how much I use each shade, so I can tell you in every roundup how much I ended up using each of the shades, and I'll do that for my Pan That palette eyeshadow too. But that way I can make sure that every single eyeshadow in a palette gets used within the year. So I think that's going to be quite interesting. I think this is going to be quite an easy palette to start off with, and I'm excited because it means that I can do some Christmassy looks without it being like, oh, I've got this massive palette where I'm trying to get through all of them. Oh, and just to add, I'm not including my glitter shades in my Tatty Beauty palette because I'm just not including glitter shades in this. In the camera these look really green, especially this one, but in person they don't look as green, and I've never actually swatched this shade, but it definitely does have a green undertone that I'd never noticed before because I don't think it translates onto the eye. This is my very neutral Pan That palette and accompanying palette. Let me know down below if you've got any ideas of what to name this part of the challenge that I'm setting for myself. As far as I know, no one else does something like this. I know people a lot of people who review products do 1 week, 1 palette. I know that Sarah Rose here on YouTube does a 1 palette each month type style thing too, so I'll link her channel down below, but I don't think she has any aims in terms of using the eyeshadows, so let me know if you've got any suggestions on what to call this series. I think I'm just going to go with Pan That palette and 1 palette 1 month. As I'm new to panning, please in the comments leave any tips you have for me for how to use shadows and different ideas in how to use them. I'm obviously not saying that these are the only shadows that I'm going to be using, but I do want to use each of these shadows once, and I want to try and use this palette as much as I can. I think what I'll probably end up doing is having my Pan That palette open every time I do my eyeshadow. That way, whatever palette I pick to use, if there's a shade that I feel like I'm missing or that I want that is in this palette, it will be right there and I can just use it and say, I'm like, okay, I want a inner corner highlight. I've got loads of them here, and so that's how I'm going to be going about it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know how you're getting on with your Pan That palettes, and leave me any tips in the comments down below, as I'm new to panning, so I could really appreciate any tips that anyone has. And let me know what your plans are for 2021. Thank you for watching.